Ella, Northampton, May 20, 2008. Belly dancers and dervishes spun in Ella's dream on the night her husband didn't come home. Her head resting on the manuscript, she watched as rough-looking warriors dined at a roadside inn, their plates piled high with delicious pies and desserts. Then she saw herself. She was searching for someone in a bustling bazaar in a citadel in a foreign country. All around her, people moved slowly, as if dancing to a tune she couldn't hear. She stopped a fat man with a drooping mustache to ask something, only she couldn't remember the question. The man looked at her blankly and hobbled away. She tried to talk to several vendors and then shoppers, but no one responded to her. At first she thought it was because she couldn't speak their language. Then she put her hand to her mouth and realized with horror that her tongue had been cut off. With increasing panic she looked around for a mirror to see her reflection and figure out if she was still the same person, but there was none in the bazaar. She started to cry and woke up to a disturbing sound, not knowing whether she still had a tongue. When Ella opened her eyes, she found Spirit frantically scratching at the back door. An animal had probably gotten onto the porch, driving the dog crazy. Skunks made him particularly nervous. The memory of his inopportune encounter with one last winter was still fresh. It had taken Ella weeks to remove that nasty odor from the dog, and even after she'd washed him in tubs of tomato juice, the smell lingered, reminiscent of burning rubber. Ella glanced at the clock on the wall. It was 2:45 in the morning. David was still not back, and perhaps he never would be. Jeanette had not returned her call, and in her pessimistic state Ella doubted she ever would. Seized by the terror of being abandoned by her husband and daughter, she opened the fridge and looked through it for a few minutes. The desire to scoop out some cherry vanilla ice cream warred with the fear of gaining weight. With no small effort, she took a step away from the fridge and slammed the door, a bit more harshly than necessary. Then Ella opened a bottle of red wine and poured herself a glass. It was good wine, light and lively, with an underlying hint of bittersweetness that she liked. Only when she was filling the second glass did it occur to her she might have opened one of David's expensive Bordeaux. She checked the label, Chateau Margaux 1996. Not knowing what to make of that, she frowned at the bottle. She was too tired and too sleepy to read anymore. So she decided to check her email. There, among half a dozen junk emails and a message from Michelle inquiring about how the manuscript was going, she found an email from Aziz Zahara. Dear Ella, if I may. Your email found me in a village in Guatemala called Momostenango. It's one of the few places left where they still use the Mayan calendar. Right across from my hostel, there is a wish tree bedecked with hundreds of pieces of fabric of every color and pattern you can imagine. They call it the tree of the brokenhearted. Those with broken hearts write down their names on pieces of paper and tie these to the branches, praying for their hearts to be healed. I hope you won't find this too presumptuous, but after reading your email I went to the wish tree and prayed that you and your daughter solve this misunderstanding. Even a speck of love should not go unappreciated, because, as Rumi said, love is the water of life. One thing that has helped me personally in the past was to stop interfering with the people around me and getting frustrated when I couldn't change them. Instead of intrusion or passivity, may I suggest submission? Some people make the mistake of confusing submission with weakness, whereas it is anything but. Submission is a form of peaceful acceptance of the terms of the universe, including the things we are currently unable to change or comprehend. According to the Mayan calendar, today is an auspicious day. A major astrological shift is on its way, ushering in a new human consciousness. I need to hurry to send you this email before the sun sets and the day is over. May love find you when you least expect, where you least expect. Yours sincerely, Aziz. Ella shut off the laptop, moved to learn that a complete stranger in a remote corner of the world had prayed for her well-being. She closed her eyes and imagined her name written on a piece of paper tied to a wish tree, dangling like a kite in the air, free and happy. A few minutes later, she opened the kitchen door and stepped out into the backyard, enjoying the unsettling coolness of the breeze. Spirit stood beside her, uneasy and growling, constantly sniffing the air. The dog's eyes grew small, then big and anxious, and his ears kept perking up, as if he had recognized in the distance something scary. Ella and her dog stood side by side under the late spring moon, staring into the thick, vast darkness, similarly frightened of the things moving in the dark, frightened of the unknown. The Novice, Baghdad, April 1242. Bowing and scraping, I showed the judge to the door and quickly returned to the main room to collect the dirty bowls. I was surprised to find Baba Zaman and the wandering dervish in the same position as when I left them, neither one saying a word. Out of the corner of my eye, I checked them, wondering if it could be possible to carry on a conversation without talking. I lingered there as long as I could, arranging the cushions, tidying up the room, picking up the crumbs on the carpet, but after a while I ran out of reasons to stay. Half-heartedly, I dragged my feet back to the kitchen. As soon as he saw me, the cook started to rain orders. Wipe the counter, mop the floor. Wash the dishes. Scrub the stove and the walls around the grill. And when you're done, don't forget to check the mousetraps. Ever since I'd come to this lodge some 6 months ago, the cook had been riding roughshod over me. Every day he made me work like a dog and called this torture part of my spiritual training, as if washing greasy dishes could be spiritual in any way. A man of few words, the cook had one favorite mantra: cleaning is praying, praying is cleaning. If that were true, all the housewives in Baghdad would have become spiritual masters, I once dared to say. He threw a wooden spoon at my head and yelled at the top of his lungs, "Such back talk will get you nowhere, son. If you want to become a dervish, be as mute as that wooden spoon. Rebelliousness is not a good quality in a novice. Speak less, mature quicker." I hated the cook, but, more than that, I feared him. I had never disobeyed his orders. That is, until this evening. As soon as the cook turned his back, I sneaked out of the kitchen and tiptoed to the main room again, dying to learn more about the wandering dervish. Who was he? What was he doing here? He wasn't like the dervishes in the lodge. His eyes looked fierce and unruly, even when he bowed his head in modesty. There was something so unusual and unpredictable about him that it was almost frightening. I peeped through a crack in the door. At first I couldn't see anything. But soon my eyes adjusted to the semi-darkness inside the room and I could make out their faces. I heard the master ask, "Tell me, Shams of Tabriz, what brings someone like you to Baghdad? Have you seen this place in a dream?" The dervish shook his head. "No, it wasn't a dream that brought me here. It was a vision. I never have dreams." "Everybody has dreams," Baba Zaman said tenderly. "It's just that you might not remember them all the time. But that doesn't mean you don't dream." "But I do not," the dervish insisted. "It is part of a deal I made with God. You see, when I was a boy I saw angels and watched the mysteries of the universe unfold before my eyes. When I told this to my parents, they weren't pleased and told me to stop dreaming. When I confided in my friends, they, too, said I was a hopeless dreamer. I tried talking to my teachers, but their response was no different. Finally I understood that whenever people heard something unusual, they called it a dream. I began to dislike the word and all that it represented." Upon saying this, the dervish paused as if he had heard a sudden sound. Then the strangest thing happened. He stood up, straightened his spine, and slowly, deliberately began to walk toward the door, all the while looking in my direction. It was as if he somehow knew I was spying on them. It was as if he could see through the wooden door. My heart pounded like mad. I wanted to run back to the kitchen but couldn't see how. My arms, my legs, my whole body froze. Through and beyond the door, the dark eyes of Shams of Tabriz were fixed upon me. As terrified as I was, I also felt a tremendous amount of energy rushing through my body. He approached, put his hand on the door handle, but just when I thought he was about to open the door and catch me, he stopped. I couldn't see his face from this close and had no idea what had changed his mind. We waited like that for an unbearably long minute. Then he turned his back, and as he paced away from the door, he continued with his story. "When I got a little older, I asked God to take away my ability to dream, so that every time I encountered him, I would know I wasn't dreaming. He agreed. He took them all away. That's why I never dream." Shams of Tabriz now stood by the open windows across the room. Outside, there was a light drizzle, and he watched it pensively before he said, "God took away my ability to dream. But to compensate for that loss, He allowed me to interpret the dreams of others. I am a dream interpreter. I expected Baba Zaman not to believe this nonsense and to scold him, as he scolds me all the time. But instead the master nodded respectfully and said, "You seem to be an unusual person. Tell me, what can I do for you?" "I don't know. Actually, I was hoping you could tell me that." "What do you mean?" asked the master, sounding puzzled. "For almost 40 years, I have been a wandering dervish. I am skilled in the ways of nature, although the ways of society are still alien to me. If necessary, I can fight like a wild animal, but I myself cannot hurt anyone. I can name the constellations in the sky, identify the trees in the forests, and read like an open book the types of people the Almighty has created in His image." Shams paused briefly and waited as the master lit an oil lamp. Then he continued. "One of the rules says, you can study God through everything and everyone in the universe, because God is not confined in a mosque, synagogue, or church. But if you are still in need of knowing where exactly His abode is, there is only one place to look for Him, in the heart of a true lover. There is no one who has lived after seeing Him, just like there is no one who has died after seeing Him. Whoever finds Him will remain with Him forever." In that dim, flickering light, Shams of Tabriz seemed even taller, his hair falling to his shoulders in disorderly waves. "But knowledge is like brackish water at the bottom of an old vase unless it flows somewhere. For years I prayed to God for a companion to share the knowledge accumulated inside me. Finally, in a vision in Samarkand, I've been told I should come to Baghdad to fulfill my destiny. I understand that you know the name of my companion and his whereabouts and will tell me, if not now, then later." Outside, the night had settled, and a wedge of moonlight streamed in through the open windows. I realized how late it was. The cook must have been looking for me, but I didn't care. For once it felt good to break the rules. "I don't know what kind of answer you are asking of me," murmured the master. "But if there is a piece of information I am destined to reveal, I know it will happen in due time. Until then you can stay here with us. Be our guest." Upon hearing this, the wandering dervish bowed humbly and gratefully to kiss Baba Zaman's hand. That is when the master asked that bizarre question, "You say you are ready to deliver all your knowledge to another person. You want to hold the truth in your palm as if it were a precious pearl and offer it to someone special. But opening up someone's heart to spiritual light is no small task for a human being. You're stealing God's thunder. What are you willing to pay in return?" "For as long as I live, I will never forget the answer the dervish gave then. Raising an eyebrow, he said, firmly, "I am willing to give my head." I flinched, feeling a cold shiver travel down my spine. When I put my eye to the crack again, I noticed that the master looked shaken by the answer as well. "Perhaps we have done enough talking for today." Baba Zaman exhaled a sigh. "You must be tired. Let me call the young novice. He will show you to your bed and provide clean sheets and a glass of milk." Now Shams of Tabriz turned toward the door, and I felt down to my bones that he was gazing at me again. More than that. It was as if he were looking through and into me, studying the pits and peaks of my soul, inspecting secrets that were hidden even from me. Perhaps he was involved with black magic or had been trained by Harut and Marut, the two angels of Babylon that the Quran warned us against. Or else he possessed supernatural talents that helped him to see through doors and walls. Either way he scared me. "No need to call the novice," he said, his voice attaining a higher pitch. "I've a feeling he is nearby and has already heard us." I let out a gasp so loud it might have woken the dead in their graves. In utter panic I jumped to my feet and scurried into the garden, seeking refuge in the dark. But an unpleasant surprise was awaiting me there. "So there you are, you little rascal," yelled the cook as he ran toward me with a broom in his hand. "You are in big trouble, son, big trouble." I jumped aside and managed to duck the broom at the last minute. "Come here or I'll break your legs." But I didn't. Instead I dashed out of the garden as fast as an arrow. While the face of Shams of Tabriz shimmered before my eyes, I ran along the winding trail that connected the lodge to the main road, and even after I had gotten far away, I couldn't stop running. My heart pounding, my throat dried up, I ran until my knees gave out and I could run no more. Ella? Northampton, May 21, 2008. Braced for a quarrel, David came home early the next morning, only to find Ella asleep in bed with Sweet Blasphemy open on her lap and an empty glass of wine by her side. He took a step toward her to pull her blanket up a little and make sure she was snugly covered, but then he changed his mind. 10 minutes later, Ella woke up. She wasn't surprised to hear him in the bathroom taking a shower. Her husband could flirt with other women, and apparently even spend the night with them, but he would rather not take his morning shower anywhere other than his own bathroom. When David finished and walked back through the room, Ella pretended to be asleep, thus saving him from having to explain his absence. Less than an hour later, both her husband and the kids had left, and Ella was in the kitchen alone. Life seemed to have resumed its regular course. She opened her favorite cookbook, Culinary Artistry Made Plain and Easy, and after considering several options chose a fairly demanding menu that would keep her busy all afternoon. Clam chowder with saffron, coconut, and oranges. Pasta baked with mushrooms, fresh herbs, and 5 cheeses. Rosemary-infused veal spare ribs with vinegar and roasted garlic. Lime-bathed green bean and cauliflower salad. Then she decided on a dessert, warm chocolate souffle. There were many reasons that Ella liked cooking. Creating a delicious meal out of ordinary ingredients was not only gratifying and fulfilling but also strangely sensual. But more than that, she enjoyed cooking because it was something she was really good at. Besides, it quieted her mind. The kitchen was the one place in her life where she could avoid the outside world altogether and stop the flow of time within herself. For some people sex might have the same effect, she imagined, but that always required 2, whereas to cook all one needed was time, care, and a bag of groceries. People who cooked on TV programs made it sound as if cooking was about inspiration, originality, and creativity. Their favorite word was experimenting. Ella disagreed. Why not leave experimenting to scientists and quirkiness to artists? Cooking was about learning the basics, following the instructions, and being respectful of the wisdom of ages. All you had to do was use time-honored traditions, not experiment with them. Cooking skills came from customs and conventions, and although it was clear that the modern age belittled such things, there was nothing wrong with being traditional in the kitchen. Ella also cherished her daily routines. Every morning, at roughly the same time, the family had breakfast. Every weekend they went to the same mall, and on the first Sunday of every month they had a dinner party with their neighbors. Because David was a workaholic with little time on his hands, Ella was in charge of everything at home, managing the finances, caring for the house, reupholstering the furniture, running errands, arranging the kids' schedules and helping them with their homework, and so on. On Thursdays she went to the Fusion Cooking Club, where the members merged the cuisines of different countries and freshened up age-old recipes with new spices and ingredients. Every Friday she spent hours at the farmers market, chatting with the farmers about their products, inspecting a jar of low-sugar organic peach jam, or explaining to another shopper how best to cook baby portobello mushrooms. Whatever she hadn't been able to find, she picked up from the Whole Foods market on the way home. Then, on Saturday evenings, David took Ella out to a restaurant, usually Thai or Japanese, and if they weren't too tired or drunk or simply not in the mood when they came home, they would have sex. Brief kisses and tender moves that exuded less passion than compassion. Once their most reliable connection, sex had lost its allure quite a while ago. Sometimes they went for weeks without making love. Ella found it odd that sex had once been so important in her life, and now when it was gone, she felt relieved, almost liberated. By and large she was fine with the idea of a long-married couple gradually abandoning the plane of physical attraction for a more reliable and stable way of relating. The only problem was that David hadn't abandoned sex as much as he had abandoned sex with his wife. She had never confronted him openly about his affairs, not even hinting of her suspicions. The fact that none of their close friends knew anything made it easier for her to feign ignorance. There were no scandals, no embarrassing coincidences, nothing to set tongues wagging. She didn't know how he managed it, given the frequency of his couplings with other women, particularly with his young assistants, but her husband handled things deftly and quietly. However, infidelity had a smell. That much Ella knew. If there was a chain of events, Ella couldn't tell which came first and which followed later. Had her loss of interest in sex been the cause of her husband's cheating? Or was it the other way round? Had David cheated on her first, and then she'd neglected her body and lost her sexual desire? Either way, the outcome remained the same: the glow between them, the light that had helped them to navigate the uncharted waters of marriage, keeping their desire afloat, even after 3 kids and 20 years, was simply not there anymore. For the next 3 hours, her mind was filled with thoughts while her hands were restless. She chopped tomatoes, minced garlic, sautéed onions, simmered sauce, grated orange peels, and kneaded dough for a loaf of whole wheat bread. That last was based on the golden advice David's mother had given her when they got engaged. "Nothing reminds a man of home like the smell of freshly baked bread," she had said. "Never buy your bread. Bake it yourself, honey. It will work wonders." Working the entire afternoon, Ella set an exquisite table with matching napkins, scented candles, and a bouquet of yellow and orange flowers so bright and striking they looked up almost artificial. For the final touch, she added sparkly napkin rings. When she was done, the dining table resembled those found in stylish home magazines. Tired but satisfied, she turned on the kitchen TV to the local news. A young therapist had been stabbed in her apartment, an electrical short had caused a fire in a hospital, and 4 high school students had been arrested for vandalism. She watched the news, shaking her head at the endless dangers looming in the world. How could people like Aziz Zahara find the desire and courage to travel the less developed parts of the globe when even the suburbs in America weren't safe anymore? Ella found it puzzling that an unpredictable and impenetrable world could drive people like her back into their houses, but had almost the opposite effect on someone like Aziz, inspiring him to embark on adventures far off the beaten track. The Rubinsteins sat at a picture-perfect table at 7:30 p.m., the burning candles giving the dining room a sacred air. An outsider watching them might assume they were a perfect family, as graceful as the wisps of smoke slowly dissolving in the air. Even Jeanette's absence didn't tarnish the picture. They ate while Orly and Avi prattled on about the day's events at school. For once Ella felt grateful to them for being so chatty and noisy and covering up the silence that would otherwise have rested heavily between her and her husband. Out of the corner of her eye, Ella watched David jab his fork into a cauliflower and chew slowly. Her gaze dropped to his thin, pale lips and pearl-white teeth, the mouth she knew so well and had kissed so many times. She visualized him kissing another woman. For some reason the rival who appeared in her mind's eye was not David's young secretary but a big-bosomed version of Susan Sarandon. Athletic and confident, she showed off her breasts in a tight dress and wore high-heeled, knee-high red leather boots, her face shiny, almost iridescent with too much makeup. Ella imagined David kissing this woman with haste and hunger, not at all the way he chewed his cauliflower at the family table. It was then and there, while having her culinary artistry made plain and easy dinner and imagining the woman her husband was having an affair with, that something inside Ella snapped. She understood with chilling clarity and calm that despite her inexperience and timidity, one day she would abandon it all: her kitchen, her dog, her children, her neighbors, her husband, her cookbooks and homemade bread recipes. She would simply walk out into the world where dangerous things happened all the time. The Master, Baghdad, January 26, 1243. Being part of a dervish lodge requires far more patience than Shams of Tabriz possesses. Yet 9 months have passed, and he is still with us. In the beginning I expected him to pack up and leave at any moment, so visible was his aversion to a strictly ordered life. I could see that it bored him stiff to have to sleep and wake up at the same hours, eat regular meals, and conform to the same routine as everyone else. He was used to flying as a lonely bird, wild and free. I suspect several times he came close to running away. Nevertheless, great as his need for solitude, even greater was his commitment to finding his companion. Shams firmly believed that one of these days I would come up with the information he needed and tell him where to go, whom to find. With this faith he stayed. During these 9 months, I watched him closely, wondering if time flowed differently for him, more rapidly and intensely. What took other dervishes months, sometimes years, to learn took him only weeks, if not days. He had a remarkable curiosity about everything new and unusual and was a great observer of nature. So many days I found him in the garden admiring the symmetry of a spider web or the dewdrops glistening on a night blooming flower. Insects, plants, and animals seemed more interesting and inspiring to him than books and manuscripts. But just when I would start thinking he had no interest in reading, I would find him immersed in an age-old book. Then, once again, he could go for weeks on end without reading and studying anything. When I asked him about this, he said one should keep the intellect satisfied and yet be careful not to spoil it. It was one of his rules. Intellect and love are made of different materials, he said. Intellect ties people in knots and risks nothing, but love dissolves all tangles and risks everything. Intellect is always cautious and advises, beware too much ecstasy, whereas love says, oh, never mind. Take the plunge. Intellect does not easily break down, whereas love can effortlessly reduce itself to rubble. But treasures are hidden among ruins. A broken heart hides treasures. As I got to know him better, I admired his audacity and acumen. But I also suspected there was a downside to Shams's unrivaled ingenuity and originality. For one thing, he was straightforward to the point of brusqueness. I taught my dervishes never to see the faults of other people and, if they did, to be forgiving and quiet. Shams, however, let no mistake go unnoticed. Whenever he saw anything wrong, he spoke out about it right away, never beating around the bush. His honesty offended others, but he liked to provoke people to see what came out of them in moments of anger. Forcing him to do ordinary tasks was difficult. He had little patience for such jobs and lost interest in something as soon as he got the hang of it. When it came to a routine, he got desperate, like a tiger trapped in a cage. If a conversation bored him or somebody made a foolish remark, he got up and left, never losing time with pleasantries. Values cherished by most human beings, such as security, comfort, and happiness, had hardly any meaning in his eyes. And his distrust of words was so intense that often he went without speaking for days. That, too, was one of his rules. Most of the problems of the world stem from linguistic mistakes and simple misunderstandings. Don't ever take words at face value. When you step into the zone of love, language as we know it becomes obsolete. That which cannot be put into words can only be grasped through silence. In time I became concerned about his well-being. For deep inside I sensed that one who could burn so fervently might have a tendency to put himself into dangerous situations. At the end of the day, our fates are in the hands of God, and only He can tell when or how we each will depart the world. For my part I decided to do my best to slow Shams down and accustom him, as much as I could, to a more tranquil way of life. And for a while I thought I might succeed. But then came winter, and with the winter came the messenger carrying a letter from afar. That letter changed everything. The letter, from Kayseri to Baghdad, February 1243, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. My dear brother Baba Zaman. May the peace and blessings of God be upon you. It has been a long time since we have last seen one another, and I hope my letter finds you in good spirits. I have heard so many wonderful things about the lodge you built on the outskirts of Baghdad, teaching dervishes the wisdom and love of God. I am writing this letter in confidentiality to share with you something that has been preoccupying my mind. Allow me to start from the beginning. As you know, the late Sultan Aladdin Kikubad was a remarkable man who excelled in leadership in difficult times. It had been his dream to build a city where poets, artisans, and philosophers could live and work in peace. A dream many called impossible given the chaos and hostility in the world, especially with the Crusaders and Mongols attacking from both sides. We have seen it all. Christians killing Muslims, Christians killing Christians, Muslims killing Christians, Muslims killing Muslims. Warring religions, sects, tribes, even brothers. But Kikubad was a determined leader. He chose the city of Konya, the first place to emerge after the Great Flood, to realize his big dream. Ali's his big dream. Now, in Konya there lives a scholar you may or may not have heard of. His name is Maulana Jalal Adin, but he often goes by the name Rumi. I have had the pleasure of meeting him, and not only that, of studying with him, first as his teacher, then, upon his father's death, as his mentor, and, after years, as his student. Yes, my friend, I became a student of my student. So talented and judicious was he, after a point I had nothing else to teach him and started to learn from him instead. His father was a brilliant scholar, too. But Rumi has a quality that very few scholars ever have, the ability to dig deep below the husk of religion and pull out from its core the gem that is universal and eternal. I want you to know that these are not solely my personal thoughts. When Rumi met the great mystic, druggist, and perfumist Friedudin Atar as a young man, Atar said of him, "This boy will open a gate in the heart of love and throw a flame into the hearts of all mystic lovers." Likewise when Ibn Arabi, the distinguished philosopher, writer, and mystic, saw the young Rumi walking behind his father one day, he exclaimed, "Glory be to God, an ocean is walking behind a lake." As young as the age of 24, Rumi became a spiritual leader. Today, 13 years later, the residents of Konya look up to him as a role model, and every Friday people from all over the region flock to the city to listen to his sermons. He has excelled at law, philosophy, theology, astronomy, history, chemistry, and algebra. Already he is said to have 10,000 disciples. His followers hang upon his every word and see him as a great enlightener who will generate a significant positive change in the history of Islam, if not in the history of the world. But to me Rumi has always been like a son. I promised his late father that I would always keep an eye on him. And now that I am an old man who is nearing his final days, I want to make sure he is in the right company. You see, as remarkable and successful as he no doubt is, Rumi himself has several times confided in me that he feels inwardly dissatisfied. There is something missing in his life, an emptiness that neither his family nor his disciples can fill. Once I told him, though he was anything but raw, he wasn't burned either. His cup was full to the brim, and yet he needed to have the door to his soul open so that the waters of love could flow in and out. When he asked me how this could be done, I told him he needed a companion, a friend of the path, and reminded him that the Quran says, "Believers are each other's mirrors." Had the subject not come up again, I might have forgotten about it completely, but on the day I left Konya, Rumi came to me to ask my opinion on a recurrent dream that had been bothering him. He told me that in his dream he was searching for someone in a big, bustling city in a land far away. Words in Arabic. Delightful sunsets. Mulberry trees and silkworms waiting patiently in secretive cocoons for their moment to arrive. Then he saw himself in the courtyard of his house, sitting by the well with a lantern in his hand, weeping. At the outset I had no idea what the fragments in his dreams indicated. Nothing seemed familiar. But then one day, after I had received a silk scarf as a gift, the answer came to me and the riddle was solved. I remembered how you were fond of silk and silkworms. I recalled the wonderful things I had heard about your tariqah. And it dawned upon me that the place Rumi saw in his dreams was none other than your dervish lodge. In short, my brother, I can't help wondering whether Rumi's companion lives under your roof. Hence the reason I write this letter. I don't know if there is such a person in your lodge. But if there is, I leave it in your hands to inform him about the destiny that awaits him. If you and I can play even a minute role in helping two rivers meet and flow into the ocean of divine love as one single watercourse, if we can help two good friends of God to meet, I will count myself blessed. There is, however, one thing you need to take into consideration. Rumi might be an influential man adored and respected by many, but that doesn't mean he does not have critics. He does. Furthermore, such a flowing together might generate discontent and opposition and cause rivalries beyond our comprehension. His fondness of his companion might also cause problems in his family and inner circle. The person who is openly loved by someone who is admired by so many people is bound to draw the envy, if not the hatred, of others. All of this might put the companion of Rumi in unpredictable danger. In other words, my brother, the person you send to Konya might never make it back. Therefore, before reaching a decision as to how to reveal this letter to Rumi's companion, I ask you to give the matter considerable thought. I am sorry to put you in a difficult position, but as we both know, God never burdens us with more than we can bear. I look forward to your answer and trust that whatever the outcome, you will take the right steps in the right direction. May the light of faith never cease to shine upon you and your dervishes. Master Syed Burhanuddin.